My name is Andrew Frawley. I was on the founding team of the Andrew Yang campaign. Second person hired started in his mother's apartment. I traveled the country as a communications manager with him for the first 9 months, shifted into the digital role, building the digital team as digital director, and later shifted into a role running, many things from branding, merchandise, and, sort of quote unquote special projects. We ran for president all of 2018, and there were, between 4 and 5 of us for that pretty much entire year. I traveled with him for 9 of those months because we were so small. So, quote unquote digital was me, hanging out with him in meetings and taking pictures and putting it on our social media, making sure our website wasn't broken, and pretty, bootstrapped stuff. Around 2019, when the Yang campaign sort of started to become, a real thing, I was operating much more in a sort of formal digital director role where, I was running our creative team, social team, advertising, website, probably a bunch of other things, the Yang Gang, the online organizing, things like that. And managed that merchandise as well in there. Manage that. So, the day-to-day of that is just, sort of complete chaos because you're hopping between, what 6 teams are doing and checking in and then doing things. And we were also obviously still small in the 30 to 40 employee range. So, and then later on, near the end of the year when we were truly adulting, I was very focused on merchandise, spent most of my time doing that. Pretty much our whole campaign was an internet moment, a giant internet moment. And to really, describe how that all came together would take up a bit too much time. So I will focus, as you mentioned, just on math. That sort of spawned out of a recording studio that we were having. Yang was finishing his famous line, the opposite of Donald Trump, is an Asian guy that likes math. And I, sat there and I was just sort of had this moment where I was like, wow, like we should put that on signs and hats. And Zach Rahman was there. He was like, yes, let's do it. And then we, famously A/B tested it at one of our rallies. We put out signs that said, Yang for president and signs that said math. And the math signs flew off the shelves. So we had our big San Francisco rally coming up. And, so to make the hat sort of catch on, we had to employ a lot of common branding things. So to launch it, we only put out 500. We put a little tag in there. We sold it for $50. The 500 sold out in 22 minutes. And so it was a super hot exclusive item. It was the first hat we put out. And then it was a lot of just sort of product placement. The hat obviously came back a few weeks later. We sold several thousand in the first day. We had a progress bar on our website. And the little Bitmoji Yang character would run along. And we were like, okay, well, let's put the hat on the character. And then same thing with the candidate. Hey, can you wear this hat? Anything the candidate wears instantly became, a bestseller. The math pin, the scarf. So I actually think from a strategic perspective, campaigns should be using their candidate as like just a hit-making machine from, a branding perspective. Like literally just give them obscure things to carry around every day, the same item every day, and their supporters will most likely fall in love with it. So our number one priority was actually not raising money. It became raising money, but early on it was entirely, awareness and building the machine, as we called it. And some examples of, how that change in priority, what that looked like is, on our Facebook page, most campaigns would have the call to action on there, the one button that you get on your page. Most people would send it to a donation link. And I opted to send that to our Facebook group because at the time we, had a small amount of supporters and we were like, okay, the most important thing right now is for our supporters, especially for Yang being a sort of scary fringe idea guy. At the beginning, universal basic income was scary. It was not mainstream. It was like, gosh, am I really going to support the guy? Like, giving out free money. So it was very important that the supporters we did have knew that others existed and they had a place to get together the building of the Yang Gang, like I said, is truly like the secret sauce, which was, it was very intentionally prioritized to give, our online supporters somewhere to organize online and get together. And then we were very active in sort of setting the tonality of, make us trend, like, did that, journalist forget us out of that article for the first, 18 months? Go let them know that, there's this amazing candidate. And that culture is very much set. And that was, the priority, because extracting an extra $10 out of a list of what was like 20,000 people was just like sort of not that important, versus having those people super, super bought in, totally gung-ho, totally all in Yang Gang. That was way more valuable than like, the total volume of money we would have gotten out of them at the time. I think the one most successful thing we did is really an Andrew Yang thing, which is the willingness to be authentic, just a super, super real person with real opinions. I think about it from for reference, I come from technology and startups and things like that, and I've worked in that space for probably 6 to 8 years. So I'm very familiar with that sort of world and the ideologies there. But we very much thought about it from the lens of, your startup adoption curve, where, you have your early innovators and things like that. And, how do you speak to each phase of the audience? And anyone breaking in, like, that's the most probably important thing, is to, create a persona and a brand for yourself that heavily identifies with the group. Because, just talking about platitudes, as an outsider, no one's going to give a shit. I think that was probably the biggest learning. However, in relation to the Yang Gang, I will say it's like probably a bit more intentionally planned than people might think. We knew 100%, Zach Rahman, talks about this a lot, that we had to make a movement. Bernie Sanders was obviously a major inspiration. It's like, okay, you're the outsider. The only thing we could possibly ever have is people. Like we don't have money. We don't have the establishment. We don't have anyone in politics supporting us. The media ignores us. You're sort of forced, your hand is forced in that you have to have, you only have one other remaining option. And thankfully should be the first option of choice. It sort of comes in three, stages, which is like building the infrastructure for the communities to thrive. And so it's your Facebook groups, your Reddits, but going beyond that is, the same thing that I mentioned with the Facebook group of changing the donate button to visit the group button. When you donated to the campaign, in the, thank you receipt, it said, hey, join our Facebook group. And so things like that were very consistently employed through a lot of different channels. We were blessed with an incredible moderator network, many of which were volunteers and pro bono. And we worked with them very, very closely early on to set the culture of what the groups were. Because coming from, I think most people are part of Facebook groups, but most of them really suck. They're sort of alive for a week, and then they start getting filled with really stupid posts. Frankly, people put in posts with no comment. It's just here's a link, and that just comes off as spam and crappy. So we set pretty strict guidelines that if you're making a post in our groups, you have to be making meaningful contributions. If you're posting a link and there's no comment with it, it's just going to get denied. And so our groups, your post had to get approved, and so there was high quality control. That allowed us to sort of focus where the groups went, and then with this big network of people, we ended up having the ability to make things trend. Many of our mods became sort of the leaders of the Yang Gang, and then they sort of, the phase 3 was that the beast gets so large that they sort of went off on their own, and they were sort of directing the machine much more. So that is what you want, is the best ideas tend to end up coming from the grassroots, and so they completely filled in from there, and came up with things far beyond what we could have thought of. The term Yang Gang, there's a lot of hesitation on that because it has gang in it, and now it's just the friendliest gang of all time, as Yang loves to tweet. But Zach Rahman, much credit to him, said, no, it's going to be great. And so that name, I think someone had mentioned it, a supporter, and then we debated adopting it. And you'll actually see if you scroll back deep enough into our Facebook group, I was making posts, sort of like A/B testing titles for the group. So I was just Yang Gangerangs and Yangsters and Yang Gang stuck. That's just the one. Same thing with math. That is something consultants would never in a million years ever suggest to you. And not even consultants, but any team more than like 5 to 6 people, someone would say, no, that's crazy. And, you just get enough doubt in the room that it would never pass. Math would not have been a thing, even in our own campaign come late 2019. There were just too many people and too many layers where someone would justifiably be like, that's crazy. But early on, we had enough congruent sort of ideology out of our, 5-6 person team that we sort of just went for it. Our early adopters loved it. And what math sort of became was, as I would tell friends, was like, people liked the idea of math and what math stood for, and not necessarily math itself. Like, I don't actually like doing math. Algebra was not a fun time for me. I do respect math. I will do math to get to data and facts and numbers. And I love the idea of a candidate who, stands for those values. And so it's very much became a symbol just as much as anything becomes a symbol. And so that was, a big, interesting learning that sort of disproved a lot of friends and family, that's for sure. Can't sit here and say like, oh, build a movement, go on podcasts, because that's obviously incredibly successful for us. Because I don't think those things happen in, like a congressional district. You're not building a movement, with your 15,000 people in your district. And that can lead to a movement, as we've obviously seen with AOC. But to win, you're not going to be a no-name who builds a movement out of nowhere. Like, how do you build a movement with 15,000 people? Like, nobody's going to have you on their podcast. And if they do, like, no one in your district's probably listening. So I actually think if it comes to a national race, build the movement for sure. And so if it's a national race, try to build the movement, because people will have you on, podcasts, and that will go out, geographically. Your people will find you, and all of those people are voters for your district, and it's relevant and great. For local, I definitely think it's, Facebook, honestly. Because districts are so small. Facebook, you can just absolutely drown your audience in ads if you can raise even a moderate amount of cash for a campaign. If you're a new candidate, if you're trying to break in, I think it's sort of what I had mentioned before, which is this adoption curve, which is, sort of stand for something. Like, you're never going to break in and beat the establishment candidate who's already in the seat by standing for platitudes. You have to have a phenomenal product, and the product is your message and it's your candidate. Digital and marketing and internet is only an amplification, but when you're playing in a small pond, like, your hacks and tricks are kind of useless. One of the big philosophies that we always had, from our merchandise and from Startup World and things is like, solve a problem or produce something people actually want. And like right now, people want are probably bored and probably anxious. And so it's like, if you're in a local district, it's like, what could you be creating that actually entertains people? So like, maybe you should be having your Zoom with the PTA, you should have something for their kids too. Or like, maybe you're running for Congress and you host like painting classes for people's kids in your district. Truly, wild card idea. That's probably not it, but that type of thinking. Nationally, for Joe Biden and folks, like, I think any candidate should have a progress bar on their website. We put the progress bar on the website, and I think there's hesitations in campaigns because they're like, oh no, we don't want people to see our rate of fundraising. Like, no one really cares. You know what actually matters at the end? Like, how much you raised. And like, the progress bar for the Yang campaign, we would put out the progress bar. Let's say it's a 7-day progress bar. we would raise, for the first 3 days, about the same amount of money we did on a normal day. Then it would 2x, 4x, and 10x. And then it would go down to probably half of our rate, and it would be back up the next day. And we were getting substantial gains every time we put up the progress bar. So, Joe Biden definitely should be doing that. So when Yang went on Stephen Colbert to give away the freedom dividend, I was the one that was tweeting the tweet. He basically goes on there and he's like, hey, I just put out a tweet right now, go to my Twitter and retweet it for, an entry to, get $1,000 a month or something. And I was the person who was in headquarters responsible for actually sending that tweet.
And all you have to do is retweet the tweet that's going to go out concurrent with this show.
Right now?
Right now, and then follow me, and then we'll give $1,000 a month to an American family on the 4th of July, Independence Day, because it's all about making us freer.
It was the most high-pressure tweet I've ever sent in my life because, you can't mess it up. Like, if you get something wrong in the tweet, everything is screwed because you'll have millions of people run and retweet it, and then you have to delete it. So I was so incredibly nervous, and I was in this room all by myself, and I had to tweet, this series of tweets with rules and regulations and all these things. I was absolutely mortified. And two interesting things that happened. One, when I sent the tweet, I had never seen retweets on a tweet, cycle as quickly as they did on this thing. The tweet, landed at, like 180,000 retweets or something. But when I sent the tweet, it was like before the tweet even loaded on the screen, the thing had like 2,000 retweets. I'd never seen anything like it. And then I didn't even know how that was possible. Like, how the hell did 2,000 people retweet this thing in like the half millisecond that I put it out? It made no sense to me. And then the second was that somewhere along the line in the thread, I actually made a typo. I actually fucked it up. And so I had to, thankfully it was in the thread, so it was just rules and regulations, so I deleted it. But that was certainly a memory. And then during the debate, I think in September, August, when Yang gave away the 10 freedom dividends, our website had like 140,000 people on it at once. And that was pretty cool.